Mayor Nardella, Mr. Mazzani, distinguished mayors, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me express my sincere condolences to the earthquake victims that struck central Italy last week and that is continuing to create fear, destruction, and sufferance. This is a painful reminder of the importance of continuing our work in building resilience to disasters. And it also echoes very much on the relevance of the thematic chosen for this meeting of Unity for Diversity. If anyone today were to write a history of urban resilience, then Florence would certainly deserve a chapter on its own. The city's heart, wealth, and fame have been renowned throughout the world for centuries. But all that was put at risk 50 years ago, when the River Arno burst its banks, taking the life of over 100 people and damaging or destroying millions of rare books and work of art. Now, we would like to think that this sort of number and destruction is the past, but this is not reality. If we look at 2015, we have witnessed 346 disasters, over 22,000 people lost their life, with 65.6 billion of economic losses. Last year alone, over 19 million people were displaced by natural hazards in 113 countries. And the majority of the displacements due to natural hazards in 2015 were caused by extreme weather events resulting from record number of drought, widespread flooding, and 19 major tropical storms. This is one of the reasons, very tangible reasons, why the international community last year gathered in Japan during the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. The conference adopted a framework, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. It covers 15 years and is actually looking how can we reduce the risk of disasters? What can we do together in order to ensure that our future is going to be saved, that our cultural heritage, but our identity is going to be preserved. The Sendai Framework was the first international agreement that has been signed in the 2015 and 2016. It is very important for all of us, and especially for you, mayors, that have got so many different issues and tasks to address, to read through the line of something important that happened within the international community. Within this moment, historical moment, that is challenged by so many economic, security, and fragility within our system and way of thinking and proceeding, the international community, through the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and later on, during the Sustainable Development Goals Agreement and discussions, in the Paris Agreement at the end of 2015, in the humanitarian discussion at the beginning of this year, and now in Quito, in terms of the urban agenda, has come together in order to create a coherence in order to see what can be done to ensure that the sustainability of our future is going to be sound. Building on this coherence of the international agreement is key, because if translated into practice, it's going to be meaning a more comprehensive approach to our work in our city and in our society. It means avoiding overlapping of activities, but also duplicating stream of funding. And as we know, funds is very much at the heart of the practicality of our activity. So the issue of the resilience and disaster risk reduction is actually being echoed in all these different agreements, starting from the Sendai framework, the focus on it. And if I have to give you a practical example, when we're looking at climate change adaptation, that, as we have heard, is part of our agenda and is going to continue with its impact through extreme weather events, whether there are going to be floods, extreme temperature, or protracted drought, then we can see that there are opportunities of combining the resilience and prevention agenda with the one of the climate change. The first one is through assessing progress in reaching the Sendai targets. The Sendai framework has got 7 targets in order to reduce human losses and economic losses. The same sort of tracking system can be used when we are looking at climate issues. The second one is disaster loss data. Mayors, you know very well what it means keeping an account on what is happening in each of your city, in each of your municipality. Well, systematically accounting on disaster losses is going to be giving you the opportunity of getting around the table a very interesting actor, which is very often the Minister of Finance, that when we're talking about prevention, it seems to be absent because things that have not happened do not have figures attached to it. So being able to systematically collect this sort of information are going to be helpful, not only in order to build resilience, but also to see what climate change is bringing to you. We have to remember that you cannot manage what we cannot monitor and count on. Financing disaster risk reduction through climate change funding mechanism can also accelerate the implementation of your resilience agenda and avoid overlapping in your programmatic funds. But also, efforts to account for disaster and climate risk and financial system presents another important opportunity to reveal the value of natural capital, or better, create understanding on who benefits from what when we are taking a risk behavior. But the Sendai framework, when the international community gathered in order to discuss, and by the way, there were over 350 mayors in Sendai, the discussion was, we need to tackle the existing vulnerability, we have to protect the current goods of our society, but we also have to think about the future. And the Sendai framework doesn't only address the existing risk and vulnerability, but is also looking and preventing new risk. More investments in infrastructure and built environment will be required over the next 40 years than has occurred over the past 4 millennia. It's going to be 70% growth by 2020. How disaster risk is addressed in the construction and real estate development sectors is therefore going to shape the future of disaster risk reduction. This is why it's so important that we learn how to work with the private sector that are investing between 80 and 90% of all new developments in order to ensure that they do apply a risk preventive approach. The earthquake in central Italy brought the voice of many famous experts in the construction sector, such as the architect Renzo Piano, that pointed out how the construction of new buildings that are resilient to earthquake cost only around 3 to 6% more of traditional construction. Retrofitting an old building in order to make it resilient, it will increase the cost to 15%. For cultural heritage that is so important for our identity, the cost is a little bit higher, between 30 and 40%. And of course, technology, sound technology applied is also requested. However, for a family that is investing their life saving into their own home, paying a little bit of extra cost in order to ensure the security of their home is not going to be an issue. However, they need to become familiar with what it means, the risk that they are facing with. Climate change, as already mentioned, will create uncertainty of risk. If you're thinking about the issue of flood and flash flood, there is a very strong unpredictability of the phenomena, which means that unfortunately the early warning systems are going to be put in check. Therefore, it is important to think that we are going to be faced and we are going to be dealing with the hazards more and more as we're going to be progressing with our work. However, what is also very evident is that we cannot think any longer in separate hazards, whether it's going to be an earthquake, whether it's going to be a technological hazard or a biological hazard. Reality is that our society, your cities, are extremely interlinked, whether one phenomena is going to have a cascading effect on another phenomena. Fukushima is the typical example of what it means a cascade effect in terms of natural hazards and technological hazards. Therefore, we must recognize that in today's interlinked society, a culture of disaster prevention is strongly needed, and that engagement of citizens is crucial to get ahead of the task. Clearly, when we're talking about culture of prevention, we also have to apply another important concept, which is to think globally, but to act locally. And this is where the responsibility and the engagement of the mayor and the municipality is key in order to support the culture of prevention. The culture of prevention means strengthening coordination of resources and capacity in implementing a comprehensive strategy in disaster risk management. But it also means understanding that we need to work together. Tackling the issue of resilience is not something that one single line ministers, one single mayor can win. It's something that we need to do collectively, whether it is the scientific community, whether it is the education sector, whether it is health. All of you, all of us has got a role to play in these regards. 6 years ago, UNISDR, that tries to be the culture of prevention and spreads the understanding of risk, launched a campaign, Making City Resilience campaign. Today, after 6 years, there are over 3,300 cities that have joined the Making City Resilience campaign. What UNISDR did, it was to develop a set of tools and guidance in order to see how the cities can become more resilient. What we have learned in return has been a tremendous amount of knowledge and information on how we can become more resilient to disasters and ensure our sustainability. I will not have time now to look into the different experiences and lessons learned. However, I would like to invite you to look into all the good practices that have been developed over the year. My last message goes to the city of Florence. A few months ago, we were here together with the mayor of Florence that very kindly agreed to host one extremely important event. Following the World Conference, the third World Conference in Sendai, Florence agreed to host the first international meeting dedicated to local engagement in the Sendai implementation. During that event, we learned a tremendous amount of experiences and good practices in disaster risk reduction, but we also focused on some gaps that needs to be addressed. We heard many experiences from different mayors on how to become resilient. I recall the one from the city of New York that was actually presented by a city from Canada, where in fact they were discussing the ecosystem approach in disaster risk reduction, which is extremely important. I think it's meaningful to think that a city like New York, considered a mega metropolis, is actually looking at ecosystem approach in order to reduce their cost, to review their sewage, but also to improve the air in order to create green spaces for the population and to create a conducive atmosphere between citizens. My final message is, if you're interested in building resilience to disasters, you're going to be learning a lot from other people. The Sendai framework gives you an overall understanding on what it needs to be done. UNISDR can help you with a number of tools and experiences, but you need to learn from each other. So 2 key appointments are coming up. One in Turkey in March 2017, focusing on the European context, and one at the global level is going to be in May in Cancun, Mexico. All the world will gather in order to discuss how to reduce the risk of disasters and how Sendai implementation is coming into practice with an impact in our society. Thank you.